On April the 25th, 1915, men of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps landed at Gallipoli. It was on that day the traditions of our fighting forces were born. These stories of their sons and daughters at war we proudly dedicate to the memory of Anzac.
Australia in 1939. 7 million people living in a continent innocent of war, guarded by 3,000 regular soldiers, a half-trained militia, 1 naval squadron, and a token air force. On September the 3rd, over the network of the Australian Broadcasting Commission, Prime Minister Menzies announced Australia's declaration of war, just 75 minutes after Britain.
Fellow Australians, it is my melancholy duty to inform you officially that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war.
The Australian Navy was already at sea, patrolling the sea lanes against raiders. On land, the sons of the 1st AIF answered the call of the 2nd. From town and country, they came to fill the ranks of the 6th Division within 3 months of the declaration of war. Others chose the Royal Australian Air Force. Young Australians enlisted within 1 week of the call for volunteers. By the end of 1940, the RAAF had 32,000 trained men. The Navy mobilized its reserves and doubled its strength within 3 weeks to man the 3 armed merchant cruisers and 8 converted minesweepers which it requisitioned. Australia armed and trained in earnest. None trained harder than the merchant navy, for Australia depended on her imports. January 1940, the 6th Division, raw civilian soldiers still, sailed to the Middle East. These were the optimistic months, when war was still a word. Adolf and Marceau were a joke when these young men went laughing to war. Though pouring its main strength overseas, Australia looked to its own defences. Darwin became the Northern Army, Air Force and Naval Base. Japan began to cast a menacing shadow over the peaceful Pacific Hemisphere. The arms and men remaining in Australia moved north and trained hard. One of the urgent tasks was the construction of a boom to protect Darwin Harbour from submarine raids. These Australian sailors, knowing of the exploits of HMAS Sydney and the scrap iron flotilla in the Mediterranean, must have found boom construction in Darwin a dull duty. But their efforts weren't in vain, for soon Japanese submarines would swarm toward the coast. The cumbrous buoys, each supporting its section of heavy underwater netting, were deployed around the harbour mouth. Before Japan attacked, booms like this protected every important Australian port. Only once, at Sydney, did the enemy penetrate this simple but effective device. 7th, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor without warning. On the following day, December the 8th, Prime Minister Curtin, attended by service chiefs and his ministers, met the Governor-General Lord Gowrie in Executive Council. Ministers present included Frank Ford, Ben Shipley, and Dr. Evatt. Their business was to declare war on Japan.
Men and women of Australia, we are at war with Japan. That has happened because in the first instance, Japanese naval and air forces launched an unprovoked attack on British and United States territory. As a result, the Australian government this afternoon took the necessary steps which will mean that a state of war exists between Australia and Japan.
The Japanese onslaught had been prepared long before Tojo informed his parliament that Japan had launched its war of conquest. The parliament listened submissively. From Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, the scene of this captured Japanese film, from the Celebes to New Britain and the Philippines, from the far north in an island arc to the Solomons, Japanese might reached out to seize in 100 days the richest colonial empire ever taken by war. Now, that wave of conquest was bearing down on a comparatively defenseless Australia. These dramatic scenes, photographed by Japanese war cameramen, graphically illustrate the rapid advance of the three Japanese armies, each of 83,000 crack troops, as they overwhelmed the island garrisons north of Australia. This was the war machine, smooth running, deadly. A nation of people trained from childhood for the war of the future. Boys of 10 or 12. Girls of the same age. All were trained for a bloody destiny. This was the war machine of a nation totally and fanatically mobilized for war. Japan's first rapid conquests secured her a web of bases stretched through Asia and the Pacific Ocean. From Burma and Singapore in the west to Rabaul and the Solomons in the east. Now Australia was isolated from the north. It was only a matter of time before she, in her turn, would be attacked. And quickly ran out. By February, these Japanese bomber squadrons on Timor and Ambon were within range of Darwin, Broome and Wyndham. On the morning of February the 19th, 18 high-level heavy bombers, 54 dive bombers, and a fighter screen of 18 Zeros took off to bomb Darwin. That morning saw war burst on Australian soil for the first time. The Zeros shot down the base's fighter protection. In an hour, Darwin was an inferno. The first bomb crashed on Darwin Wharf, killing 20 laborers instantly. Shipping, crowded into the harbor, had no chance to disperse. 8 ships were sunk and 14 badly damaged. The hospital ship Menanda was among the casualties. Darwin town was bombed and machine gunned mercilessly throughout that cyclonic hour. The town burned through the day and night. Servicemen and townspeople worked frantically to rescue the wounded. There were many wounded. There were many dead. A 1,000-pound bomb hit the post office, killing the postmaster, his wife and daughter, and 6 employees. Mrs. Thelma Cook, accompanied by her son, was the last civilian woman to be evacuated from the Darwin area in 1942, and was one of the first to return in 1946. The first raid on Darwin cost 238 lives. 400 were injured. The Prime Minister John Curtin, Australia rallied. It forced infant industries into maturity within months of the crisis. It built warships, 3 destroyers, 6 frigates, 60 corvettes, 24 of them for Britain and India. It built merchant ships. It repaired warships and merchant ships. Nearly 11,000 of them in 44 months. It built aircraft. It built bombers and fighters and transports. 3,500 of them in 4 years, including 1,000 Beaufort bombers and Beaufighters. It built, almost wholly from local resources, some of the proudest products of the British aircraft industry, like this Mosquito. Australian technicians and artisans performed miracles of ingenuity. Australia made munitions, expanding a small government industry into 45 factories and 240 annexes, involving 1,000 companies. In 5 years, it manufactured 271 million pounds worth of all kinds of munitions. At their peak, munitions factories employed 156,000 workers, mainly women. With 850,000 men in the services, women went to work on the home front. "66,000 women joined the services, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, to release their menfolk for active service. "450,000 men of the Allied Works Council built camps, airstrips and strategic roads, opening up the dead heart of Australia. Darwin at last obtained its overland road. Darwin itself became a fortress. By the end of 1942, it bristled with defenses. 51 times in that year, enemy bombers tried again to take it by surprise. They did not succeed. To Darwin came men of the 6th Division, veterans by now of desert warfare. They expected invasion. They trained for it. Twin gun carriers of the 6th Divisional Cavalry supported the 19th Brigade in a key mainland defense position. These were tense days, heavy with the threat of imminent invasion. Royal Australian Air Force, backed by American bomber and fighter groups, hit back savagely at Jap raiders and Jap bases. The end was nowhere in sight, but morale was high, sky high. Daily missions, striking at enemy shipping and bases, the men of Australia's Hudson squadrons, their bombers still wearing peacetime passenger curtains, ranged deeper and deeper northward. June saw a sudden renewal of air attacks on Darwin as Japan prepared to invade Papua. There were 4 raids on 4 consecutive days. Again, Darwin burned. Now the base could strike back with fighter squadrons which included Australian and British veterans of the Battle of Britain. In August, 14 enemy raiders were shot down into the Darwin bush. RAAF pilots, viewing the wreckage, were men refreshed. John Curtin had said after the first raid, "Whatever the future holds, we are Australians, and we will fight grimly and victoriously." Grimly they did fight, and victoriously. We're not alone. On March the 21st, after 100 black days, America's General MacArthur established his headquarters in Melbourne. He told Australia, "I pledge you the full resources of all the mighty power of my country and the blood of my countrymen. My presence here is tangible evidence of our unity. My faith in ultimate victory is invincible." At Canberra, he was greeted by Minister of the Army and Deputy Prime Minister Frank Ford. Ford told MacArthur that on that day, the last of Australia's manpower, every available man to the age of 60, had been registered for service under the Defence Act. John Curtin told him Australia would wage war to the limit. From then on, the Allies' offensive plan against Japan took shape. Japanese sea communications between Tokyo and her far-flung, newly conquered bases were vulnerable. From New Zealand, Admiral Halsey's Naval Task Force struck at their lines of communication. From Hawaii, the carrier force of Admiral Nimitz struck in from the east. In the west, General Slim's 7th Army advanced through Burma to link with Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese Army. But the main thrust was to come from General MacArthur's campaign of island-hopping reconquests from New Guinea to the Philippines. For this central thrust, Australia was the springboard, and the Allies' most important base in the war against Japan. Steadily, American power, backing Australian manpower, began to pour into Australia. American and Australian pilots now flew the famous Kitty Hawk fighter. Yet another modern fighter appeared in the skies over Darwin. What is it? It's a Spitfire. With the acquisition of the British Spitfire, which had helped to win the Battle of Britain, at last they had a fighter which could tackle the enemy's Zeros on equal terms. Against aircraft like these, the assault on Darwin slowed down to hit-and-run raids. The hit-and-run raids exacted their toll of damage. Darwin remained a Japanese target until 1944, a place where they could revenge the defeats they were suffering in New Guinea. height of Darwin's ordeal, Japan staged its most daring raid far to the south in May 1942. Allied warships in Sydney Harbour were the target in a night attack by midget two-man submarines launched from a mother sub off the coast. One blew up at the boom. A torpedo from the second, this one, missed the cruiser Chicago, but hit the store ship Cuttable. A week later, the mother submarine shelled Bondi and Rose Bay from the sea. It hit Holmes, but injured only one man. Hudson bombers patrol the coast constantly, seeking out submarines. In 1942, there was reason to fear that the submarine battle of the Atlantic, then at its height, might be paralleled in the sea approaches to Australia. In 2 years, the enemy claimed 26 Allied merchantmen between Brisbane and Gabo Island. Most shocking loss was the hospital ship Centaur off Queensland on the way to Port Moresby. 268 lives were lost. The main ports, such as Sydney, had heavy coastal defences constantly in readiness. An entire Australian corps, 3 infantry divisions and 1 armoured division, was assigned to Western Australia. The West, with its hundreds of miles of unpopulated coastline, seemed to invite invasion. It never came, but here many Australian soldiers spent a weary war, waiting and training. The wide open spaces of the West brought special problems. The RAAF had to establish mobile operating theatres to get medical aid to the airmen forced down in the inaccessible interior. The young, rapidly expanding Air Force suffered many crashes over wild country in weather conditions which still could not be charted accurately. There, mobile hospital units, penetrating often where few white men had set foot, saved many valuable lives. Australia mobilized totally. Even pigeons were pressed into service. In the trackless back of beyond, pigeons were sometimes the only method of communication when wireless links lost touch with each other over the long distances. Pigeons were part of the war in Australia in 1942, but only part. Guns and tanks, the arms of a 20th century army, were the main part. Australia's armoured division in the West never had a chance to slug it out with the Japanese, but its presence was a powerful deterrent to invasion. Australia trained its own paratroopers for the Blitzkrieg campaign that could be expected if the invasion came. AIF volunteers, hand-picked, trained with American equipment for any emergency. That emergency never came. Japan lost the war outside Australia, on New Guinea jungle trails and coral atolls. One casualty of that Allied victory was the Prime Minister, who turned Australia into a mighty arsenal and armed camp. John Curtin, one of the greatest of Allied civilian leaders, died in office in 1945. All Australia mourned its first citizen, whose death resulted from his conscientious and unstinting service to his country. 1 month after John Curtin's death, the end came. The end of the Pacific War. The end of World War II. D-Day Day. people of Australia had reason to rejoice, and reason besides for pride. This island continent of 7 million people had furnished to the Allied cause more than 1 million fighting men, including 600,000 in the AIF, 45,000 in the RAF, and 190,000 in the RAAF. Australian women served in all services, 3,000 in the Navy, 35,000 in the Army, 27,000 in the Air Force. 4 out of 10 of the civilian population were wholly employed in the war effort. Many thousands toiled at unfamiliar tasks to release others for the fighting services. In every home, in every part of Australia, a sacrifice had been made to uphold the tradition of Anzac.